All right, it's time for more Nietzsche. Once I get everything all set up here, that out. Get over there. Pop this out. Get that over there. And voila. Boom. Oh, all right. Let's dig right into this. No prompt and ceremony required. You know what's going on if you're here, and if you're not here, then you don't know what's going on. I think that's a fair way to look at it, eh? Reason. Ooh. So we are. Get this thing to do its thing. Wait. Apparently, there is some bullshit. There we go. Don't mind these cords. They're inconsequential. Get over here. If this thing turns around on me one more time, I swear to God, gonna have a fit. All right, now let's actually get people seeing what's going on, what I'm bitching about, and there we go. Look at this. Just fucking mind of its goddamn own going on here. There. Hopefully, better. I assume that it is. Now I'm done having fun. No fun's allowed. No fun allowed when streaming. Oh, get this damn headset off me. A reason in philosophy. You ask me, which of the following philosophers' traits are really idiosyncrasies? For example, their lack of historical sense, their hatred of the very idea of becoming their Egyptianism. Okay. They think that they show their respect for a subject when they dehistorize it. Sub specie aeternae. When they turn it into a mummy. Town's full of assholes. All that philosophers have handled for thousands of years have been concept mummies. Nothing real escaped their grasp alive. When these honorable idolaters of concepts worship something, they kill it and stuff it. They threaten the very life of everything they worship. Death, change, old age, as well as procreation and growth are to their minds objections, even refutation. Whatever has being does not become. Whatever becomes does not have being. Now they all believe, desperately even, in what has being. Off. But since they never grasp it, they seek for reason why it is kept from them. There must be mere appearance. There must be some deception which prevents us from perceiving that which has being. Where is the deceiver? We have found them, they cry ecstatically. It is in the senses. The senses which are so immoral which are so immoral in other ways too, deceive us concerning the true world. Moral. Let us free ourselves from the deception of these senses, from becoming, from history, from lies. History is nothing but faith in the senses, faith in lies. Moral. Let us say no to all who have faith in the senses. To all the rest of mankind, they are the mob. Let us be philosophers. Let us be mummies. Let us represent monotono theism by adopting the expression of a gravedigger, and above all, away with the body, this wretched idea fixe, sure, of the senses, to figure by all fallacies of logic, refuted, even impossible, although it is imprudent enough to behave as if it were real. That was like an entire paragraph or more of sarcasm. All right. With the highest respect, I accept the name of Heraclitus, when the rest of the philosophic folk rejected the testimony of the senses because they showed multiplicity and change. He rejected their testimony because they showed things as if they had permanence and unity. Heraclitus too did the senses. Oh, okay. Heraclitus too did the senses an injustice. They lie neither in the way the eclectics believe, nor as he believed. They do not lie at all. We make of their testimony that alone introduces lies. For example, the lie of unity, the lie of thinghood, of substance, of permanence. Reason is the cause of our falsification of the testimony of the senses. In so far as the senses show becoming, passing away, and change, they do not lie. But Heraclitus will remain eternally right with his assertion that being is an empty fiction. The apparent world is the only one. The true world is merely added by a lie. And what magnificent instruments of observation we possess in our senses. This nose, for example, of which no philosopher has yet spoken with reverence and gratitude, is actually the most delicate instrument so far at our disposal. It is able to detect minimal differences of motion which even a spectroscope cannot detect. Today we possess science precisely to the extent to which we have decided to accept the testimony of the senses, to the extent to which we sharpen them further, arm them, and have learned to think them through. The rest is miscarriage, and not yet science. In other words, metaphysics, theology, psychology, epistemology, or formal science, a doctrine of signs, such as logic, and that applied logic which is called mathematics. In reality, it is not encountered at all, not even as a problem, no more than the question of value of such a sign convention as logic. The other idiosyncrasies of the philosophers, man, I wish I could be in, like, this is the groove I need to be in right here. I need to find out how to be here. It's very strange. Because today sucked. I don't know if you're here for Duskers. My god, I was monotonous as fuck. The other idiosyncrasies of the philosophers is no less dangerous. It consists in confusing the last and the first. They place that which comes at the end, unfortunately, for it ought not to come at all, namely the highest concepts, which means the most general, the emptiest concepts, the last smoke of evaporating reality, in the beginning as the beginning. This again is nothing but their way of showing reverence. The higher may not grow out of the lower, may not have grown at all. Moral. Whatever is of the first rank must be self-caused. Origin out of something else is considered an objection, a questioning of value. All the highest values are of the first rank. All the highest concepts, that which has beginning, the unconditional, the good, the true, the perfect. All these cannot become, and must therefore be self-caused. All these, moreover, cannot be unlike each other or in contradiction to each other. Thus they arrive at their stupendous concept, God. That which is last, thinnest, and emptiest is put first, as the cause, as the most real being. Why did mankind have to take seriously the brain afflictions of sick web spinners? They have paid dearly for it. At long last, let us contrast the very different manner in which we conceive the problem of error and appearance. I say we for politeness' sake. Formerly, alteration, change, and becoming at all, we were taken as proof of mere appearance, as an indication that there must be something which led us astray. Today, conversely, precisely insofar as the prejudice of reason forces us to posit unity, identity, permanence, substance, cause, thinghood, being, we see ourselves somehow caught in error, compelled into error. So certainly are we. On the basis of rigorous examination, that is where the error lies. It is no different in this case than the movement of the sun. There our eye is the constant advocate of error. Here is our language. In its origin, language belongs. In the age of the most rudimentary form of psychology, we enter a realm of crude fetishism when we summon before consciousness the basic presuppositions of the metaphysics of language. In plain talk, the presupposition of reason. Everywhere it sees a doer and a doing, it believes in will as the cause. It believes in the ego as being, in the ego as substance, and it projects the faith in the ego substance upon all things. Only thereby does it first create the concept of thing. Everywhere being is projected by thought, pushed underneath as the cause. The concept of being follows and is derivative of the concept of ego. In the beginning, there is that great calamity of error, that the will is something which is effective, that the will is a capacity. Today we know that it is only a word. Very much later, in a world which was in 1,000 ways more enlightened, philosophers, to their great surprise, became aware of sureness, the objective certainty in our handling of categories of reason. They concluded that these categories could not be derived from anything empirical, or anything empirical plainly contradicted them. Whence then were they derived? And in India, as in Greece, the same mistake was made. We must once have been at home in a higher world, instead of a very much lower one, which would have been the truth. We must have been divine, for we have reason. Indeed, nothing has yet possessed a more naive power of persuasion than the error concerning being, as it has been formulated by the electic. For example, electics, for example. After all, every word we say and every sentence speaks in its favor. Even the opponents of the electics still succumb to the seduction of their concept being. Democritus, among others, when he invented his atom. Reason in language. Oh, what an old deceptive female she is. I am afraid we are not rid of God because we still have faith in grammar. It will be appreciated if I condense so essential and so new an insight into 4 theses. In that way I facilitate comprehension. In that way I provoke contradiction. First proposition. The reason for which this world has been characterized as apparent are the very reasons which indicate its reality. Any other kind of reality is absolutely indemonstrable. So first proposition, the reason for which this world has been characterized as apparent are the very reasons which indicate its reality. Any other kind of reality is absolutely indemonstrable. Second proposition, the first criteria which have been bestowed on the true being of thing are the criteria of not being, of not. The true world has been constructed out of contradiction to the actual world, indeed an apparent world, insofar as it is merely a moral optical illusion. Third proposition. To invent fables about a world other than this one has no meaning at all, unless an instinct of slander, detraction, and suspicion against life has gained the upper hand in us. In that case we avenge ourselves against life with a phantasmagoria of another, better life. Fourth proposition. any distinction between a true and apparent world, whether in Christian manner or in the manner of Kant, in the end an underhanded Christian, is only a suggestion of decadence, a symptom of decline of life. That the artist esteems appearance higher than reality is no objection to this proposition, for appearance in this case means reality once more, only by way of selection, reinforcement, and correction. The tragic artist is no pessimist. He is precisely the one who says yes to everything questionable, even to the terrible. He is Dionysian. How the true world finally became a fable, a history of human error. 1. The true world, attainable for the sage, the pious, the virtuous man. He lives in it, he is it, the oldest form of the idea, relatively sensible, simple, and persuasive, a circumlocution for the sentence, I, Plato, am the truth. 2. The true world, unattainable for now, but promised for the sage, the pious, and the virtuous man, for the sinner who repents. Progress of the idea, it becomes more subtle, insidious, incomprehensible. It becomes female, it becomes Christian. 3. The true world, unattainable, indemonstrable, unpromisable, but the very thought of it, a consolation, an obligation, an imperative. At bottom, the old sun, but seen through mist and skepticism, the idea has become elusive, pale, Nordic. Kantian. Königsbergian. Definitely German that I don't understand, except that it means Kantian. Thank you for the sub notes, oh fair editor. 4. The true world, unattainable, at any rate unattained, and being unattained also unknown, consequently not consoling, redeeming, or obliging. How could something unknown obligate us? Gray morning, the first yawn of reason, the cock-crow of positivism. 5. The true world, an idea which is no longer good for anything, not even obligating, an idea which has become useless, superfluous, consequently a refuted idea. Let us abolish it. Bright day, breakfast, return of bon sense and cheerfulness, Plato's embarrassed blush, pandemonium of all free spirits. The true world we have abolished. What world has remained? The apparent one, perhaps? But no. With the true world we have also abolished the apparent one. Noon, moment of the briefest shadow, end of the longest error, high point of humanity. Incepta Zarathustra. Zarathustra begins, an echo of the conclusion of the gay science. Nietzsche has used the first section of the prologue of Zarathustra, his next work, as the final aphorism of Book 4, and given it the title Incepta Tragedia. Morality as anti-nature. All the passions have a phase. When they are merely disastrous, when they drag down their victim with the weight of stupidity, and later, very much later, the phase when they wed the spirit, when they spiritualize themselves. Formally, in view of the element of stupidity, in passion, war has declared on passion itself. Its destruction was plotted. All the old moral monsters are agreed of this. One must kill the passions. Il faut tuer les passions. The most famous formula for this is to be found in the New Testament, that Sermon on the Mount, where, incidentally, things are by no means looked at from a height. There it is said, for example, with particular reference to sexuality, if the eye offend thee, pluck it out. Fortunately, no Christian acts in accordance with this precept. destroying the passions and cravings merely as a preventative measure against their stupidity and the unpleasant consequence of the stupidity. Today, this itself strikes us as merely another acute form of stupidity. We no longer admire dentists who pluck out teeth so that they will not hurt anymore. To be fair, it should be admitted, however, that on the ground out of which Christianity grew, the concept of the spiritualization of passion could never have been formed. After, oh, yeah. After all, the first church, as is well known, fought against the intelligent in favor of the poor in spirit. How could one expect from it an intelligent war against passion? The church fights passion with excision in every sense. Its practice, its cure, is castratism. It never asks, how can one spiritualize, beautify, deify a craving? It has at all times laid the stress of discipline on extirpation, of sensuality, of pride, of the lust to rule, of avarice, of vengefulness. But an attack on the roots of passion means an attack on the roots of life. The practice of the church is hostile to life. The same means in the fight against craving, castration, extirpation, is instinctively chosen by those who are too weak-willed, too degenerate to be able to impose moderation on themselves, by those who are so constituted that they require le trappe, or the Trappist order, to use a figure of speech, or without a figure of speech, some kind of definitive declaration of hostility, a cleft between themselves and the passion. Radical means are indispensable only for the degenerate. The weakness of the will, or, to speak more definitely, the inability not to respond to a stimulus. It is itself merely another form of denigration. The radical hostility, the deadly hostility against sensuality, is always a symptom to reflect on. It entitles us to suppositions concerning the total state of one who is excessive in this manner. This hostility, this hatred, by the way, reaches its climax only when such types lack even firmness for this radical cure, for this renunciation of their devil. One should survey the whole history of the priests and philosophers, including the artists. The most poisonous things against the senses have been said not by the impotent nor the ascetics, by the impossible ascetics, by those who really were in dire need of being ascetics. The spiritualization of sensuality is called love. It represents a great triumph over Christianity. Another triumph is our spiritualization of hostility. It consists in a profound appreciation of the value of having enemies. In short, it means acting and thinking in the opposite way from that which has been the rule. The church always wanted the destruction of its enemies. We immoralists and anti-Christians found our advantage in this, that the church exists. In the political realm, too, hostility has become more spiritual, much more sensible, much more thoughtful, much more considerate. At most, every party understands how it is in the interest of its own self-preservation that the opposition should not lose all strength. The same is true of power politics. A new creation in particular, the new Reich, for example, needs enemies more than friends. In opposition alone, it feels itself necessary. In opposition alone does it become necessary. Our attitude to the internal enemy is no different. Here too we have spiritualized hostility. Here too we have come to appreciate its value. The price of fruitfulness is to be rich in eternal opposition. One remains young only as long as the soul does not stretch itself does not stretch itself and desire peace. Nothing has become more alien to us than that desiratum of former times, peace of soul, the Christian desiratum. There is nothing we envy less. Desiratum. There is nothing we envy less than the moralistic cow and the fat happiness of good conscience. One has renounced the great life when he renounces war. In many cases, to be sure, peace of soul is merely a misunderstanding, something else which lacks only a more honest name. Without further ado or prejudice, a few examples, peace of soul, can be for one, the gentle radiation of rich animality into the moral or religious sphere, or the beginning of weariness, the first shadow of evening, of any kind of evening, or a sign that the air is humid, that the south winds are approaching, or unrecognized gratitude for good digestion, sometimes called love of man, or the attainment of calm by a convalescent who feels a new relish in all things and waits, or the state which follows a thorough satisfaction of our dominant passion, the well-being of a rare repletion, or the senile weakness of our will, our cravings, our vices, or laziness persuaded by vanity to give itself moral airs, or the emergence of certainty, even a dreadful certainty after long tension and torture by uncertainty, or the expression of maturity and mastery in the midst of doing, creating, working, and willing, calm breathing, attained, freedom of the will, twilight of the idols, who knows, perhaps also only a kind of peace of soul. I reduced a principle to a formula. Every naturalism in morality, that is, every healthy morality, is dominated by an instinct of life. Some commandment of life is fulfilled by a determined canon of shalt or shalt not. Some inhibition and hostile element on the path of life is thus removed. Anti-natural morality, that is, almost every morality which has so far been taught, revered, and preached, turns conversely against the instincts of life. It is condemnation of these instincts, now secret, now outspoken and impudent. When it says God looks at the heart, it says no. It says no to both the lowest and the highest desires of life, and posits God as the enemy of life. The saint in whom God delights is the ideal eunuch. Life has come to an end where the kingdom of God begins. Once one has comprehended the outrage of such a revolt against life, as has become almost sacrosanct in Christian morality, one has fortunately also comprehended something else. The futility, apparentness, absurdity, and mendaciousness of such a revolt. A condemnation of life by the living remains in the end a mere symptom of a certain kind of life. The question whether it is justified or unjustified is not even raised thereby. One would require a position outside of life, and yet have to know it as well as one, as many as all who have lived it, in order to be permitted even to touch the problem of value of life. Reasons enough to comprehend that this problem is for us an unapproachable problem. When we speak of values, we speak with the inspiration, with the way of looking at things, which is part of life. Life forces us to posit values. Life itself values through us when we posit values. From this it follows that even the anti-natural morality which conceives of God as the counter-concept and condemnation of life is only a value of judgment of life. But what of life? What kind of life? I have already given the answer: of declining, weakened, weary, condemned life. Morality, as it has so far been understood, as it has in the end been formulated once more by Schopenhauer, as negotiation of the will to life, is the very instinct of decadence, which makes an imperative of itself. It says, perish. It is a condemnation pronounced by the condemned. Let us finally consider how naive it is altogether to say, man ought to be such and such. Reality shows us an enchanting wealth of types, the abundance of a lavish play and change of forms, and some wretched loafer of a moralist comments, no, man ought to be different. He even knows that man should be like this wretched bigot and prig. He paints himself on the wall and comments ecce homo. But even when the moralist addresses himself only to the single human being and says to him, you ought to be such and such, he does not cease to make himself ridiculous. The single human being is a piece of fatum. From the front and from the rear, one law more, one necessity more of all that is yet to come to be. And say to him, change yourself, is to demand that everything be changed, even retroactively. And indeed, there have been consistent moralists who wanted man to be different, that is, virtuous. They wanted him remade in their own image as a prig. To that end, they negated this world. No small madness, no modest kind of immodesty. Morality, insofar as it condemns for its own sake, and not out of regard for the concerns, considerations, and contrivances of life, it is a special error, with which one ought to have no pity, an idiosyncrasy of degenerates, which has caused immeasurable harm. We others, we immoralists, have conversely made room in our hearts for every kind of understanding, comprehending, and approving. We do not easily negate. We make it a point of honor to be affirmers. More and more nobody heard that. More and more our eyes have opened to that economy which needs to know how to utilize all that holy witlessness of the priest, of the diseased reason in the priest. What? Oh, damn you, you hanging hyphen. Rejects that economy in the law of life which finds an advantage even in the disgusting species of the prigs, the priests, the virtuous. What advantage? But we ourselves, we immoralists, are the answer. The four great errors. The error of confusing cause and effect. There is no... Hold on. I like that last paragraph quite a bit. I'm going to have a bit of an underline here. Don't mind me. We immoralists have conversely made room in our hearts for every kind of misunderstanding, comprehending. We do not easily make it a point of honor to be affirmers. More and more our eyes have opened the economy, which needs to know how to utilize that all-holy witlessness of the priest and the diseased reason in the priest. Rejects that economy in the law of life which finds an advantage even in the disgusting species of prigs. The four great errors. The error of confusing cause and effect. There is no more dangerous error than that of mistaking the effect for the cause. I call it the real corruption of reason. Yet this error belongs among the most ancient and recent habits of mankind. It is even hallowed among us, and goes by the name of religion or morality. Every single sentence which religion and morality formulates contains it. Priests and legislators of moral codes are the originators of this corruption of reason. I give an example. Everybody knows the book of the famous Cornaro, in which he recommends his slender diet as a recipe for a long and happy life, a virtuous one too. Few books have been read so much. Even now, thousands of copies are sold in England every year. I have no doubt that scarcely any book except the Bible, as is met, has done much harm, has shortened as many lives as this well-intentioned curiosum. The reason, the mistaking, the effect for the cause, the worthy Italian, his diet, was the cause of his long life. The worthy Italian thought his diet was the cause of his long life, whereas the precondition for long life, the extraordinary slowness of his metabolism, the consumption of so little, was the cause of his slender diet. He was not free to eat little or much. His frugality was not a matter of free will. He became sick when he ate more. But whoever is no carp not only does well to eat properly, but needs to. The scholar in our time, with his rapid consumption of nervous energy, would simply destroy himself with Cornaro's diet. Believe him who has tried. Creda experto. Interesting. The most general formula on which every religion and morality is founded on: do this and that, refrain from this and that, then you'll be happy. Otherwise, ... Every morality, every religion is this imperative. I call it the great original sin of reason, the immortal unreason. In my mouth, this formula is changed into its opposite. First example of my revaluation of all values: a well-turned-out human being, a happy one, must perform certain actions and shrinks instinctively from other actions. He carries the order which he represents psychologically into his relations with other human beings and things. In a formula, his virtue is the effect of his happiness. A long life, many descendants. This is not the wages of virtue. Rather, virtue itself is that slowing down of the metabolism, which leads, among other things, also to a long life. Many descendants, in short, to chronarism. The church and morality say a generation, a people, are destroyed by license and luxury. My recovered reason says, when a people approaches destruction, when it degenerates psychology, then license and luxury follow. From this, namely the craving for ever stronger and more frequent stimulation, as every exhausted nature knows it. Wow, that's actually really interesting. That's a interesting statement. When a people approaches destruction, when it degenerates psychologically, then license and luxury follow. Namely the craving for ever stronger and more frequent stimulation. Every exhausted nature knows it. My recovered says, when a people approaches this young man turns pale early and wilts, his friends say. That is due to this or that disease. I say that he became diseased, that he did not resist the disease, was already the effect of an impoverished life of hereditary exhaustion. The newspaper reads, this party destroys itself by making such a mistake. My higher politics say, a party which makes such mistakes has reached its end. It has lost its sureness of instinct. Every mistake in every sense is the effect of denigration of the instinct, of the denigration of the will. One could almost define what is bad in this way. All that is good is instinct, and hence easy, necessary, free. Laboriousness is an objection. The god is typical, different. The god is typically different from the hero. In my language, light feet are the first attribute of divinity. A generation of people destroys its. A generation of people are destroyed by license and luxury. When a people approaches destruction, when it degenerates psychology, license and luxury follow from this. The era of false causality. People believed at all times that they knew what a cause is, but whence did we take our knowledge, or more precisely, our faith that we had such knowledge? Whence, yes, so from where did we take our knowledge? From the realm of the famous inner facts, of which not a single one has so far proved to be factual. We believed ourselves to be causal in the act of willing. We thought that here at least we caught causality in the act, nor did one doubt that all the antecedents of an act, its causes, were to be sought in consciousness, and would be found there once sought as motives, else one would not have been free and responsible for it. Finally, who would have denied that a thought is caused, that the ego causes thought? Of these inward facts, which seem to guarantee causality, the first and most persuasive is that of the will as cause, the conception of a consciousness, spirit, as a cause, and later also that of ego as cause, the subject, are only afterbirths. First, the causality of the will was firmly accepted and given as empirical. Meanwhile, we have thought better of it. Today we no longer believe a word of all this. The inner world is full of phantoms and will-o'-the-wisps. The will is one of them. The will no longer moves anything, hence does not explain anything either. It merely accompanies events. It can also be absent. The so-called motive and other error, merely a surface phenomenon of consciousness, something alongside the deed that is more likely to be covered up by the antecedents of the deeds of the deeds than to represent them. As for the ego, that has become a fable, a fiction, a play on words. It has altogether ceased to think, feel, or will. What follows from this? There are no mental causes at all. The whole of the allegedly empirical evidence for that has gone to the devil. That is what follows, and what a fine abuse we have perpetrated with this empirical evidence. We have created the world on this bias, a world of causes, a world of wills, a world of spirits. The most ancient enduring psychology was at work here, and did not do anything else. All that happened was considered a doing, all doing the effect of will. The world became to it a multiplicity of doers. A doer, a subject, was slipped under all that happened. It was out of himself that man projected his three inner facts, that in which he believed most firmly, the will, the spirit, the ego. He even took the concept of being from the concept of ego. He posited things as being in his image, in accordance to the concept of the ego as a cause. Small wonder Small wonder that later he always found in things only that which he had put into them. The thing itself, to say it once more, the concept of thing is a mere reflex of the faith in ego as the cause, and even your atom, my dear mechanists and physicists, how much error, how much rudimentary psychology is still residual in your atom, not to mention the thing itself, the horrendum pudendum of this metaphysicians, the error of the spirit as cause mistaken for reality, and made the very measure of reality and called God. 4. The error of imaginary causes. To begin with dreams ex post facto, a cause is slipped under a particular sensation. For example, one following a far-off cannon shot, often a whole little novel in which the dreamer turns up as the protagonist. The sensation endures, meanwhile, in a kind of resonance. It waits, as it were, until the causal instinct permits it to step into the foreground, now no longer as a chance occurrence, but as a meaning. The cannon shot appears in a casual mode, in an apparent reversal of time. What is really latter, the motivation, is experienced first, often with 100 details which pass like lightning, and the shot follows. What has happened? The representation which were produced by a certain state have been misunderstood in its causes. In fact, we do the same thing when awake. Most of our general feelings, every kind of inhibition, pressure, tension, and explosion in the play and counterplay of our organs, and particularly the state of the nervous system, of the nervus sympathicus, excite our causal instinct. We want to have a reason for feeling this way or that, or feeling bad or feeling good. We are never satisfied merely to state the fact that we feel this way or not. We admit this fact only become conscious of it only when we have furnished some kind of motivation. Memory, which swings into action in such cases unknown to us, brings up earlier states of the same kind, together with a causal interpretation associated with them, not their real causes. The faith, to be sure, that such representation, such accompanying consciousness, processes are the causes, is also brought forth by memory. Thus originates a habitual acceptance of particular causal interpretations, which, as a matter of fact, inhibits any investigation into the real cause, and even precludes it. Okay. Interesting. So it's like he's positing that by trying to find the cause of an emotion or a feeling or a particular state of mind or mood, we are in fact making it impossible to either deal with it or replicate it or handle it in any way. I find particularly interesting, because my memory sucks, or at least I would interpret it as poor. And I myself find right now I'm into this, I'm reading, I'm having fun, I'm enjoying myself, regardless of kind of how I feel. And I've had several days, it's been hard to get into what I'm doing, playing a video game, or reading this book, or even existing. And I blamed it on being sick. I blamed it on being ill. Is that correct? And then is it even correct to go so far as to say, well, it's because I am, I guess I'll say, depressed. Sure, never been to a doctor, never been diagnosed, but the symptoms are there. And so if I were to say I was depressed because I'm alone. So do I feel this way, lost and alone, feel lost and upset and sad and lonely because I am actually alone? Or is that a false correlation? Am I feeling that way because of some other reason, some other unseen a real interesting thought. Because then it makes me kind of question my own responses. I see something, I look at it, and I feel either happy or sad about it because of other conditioned responses that I've had, instead of looking at that thing, having a response that is unique, genuine to that thing. Oh well, I'll continue on. Shouting into the void as I am. Dog ear this. I'm the only one here. I'll do what I want. Dog ear this. And thus originates habitual acceptance of particular causal interpretation, which, as a matter of fact, inhibits any investigation into the real cause, even precludes it. We are never satisfied merely to state the fact that we feel this way or that. We admit this fact only, become conscious of it only, when we have furnished some kind of motivation. We want to have reason for feeling this way or that. We're feeling bad or feeling good. Glad I was the only one here for that little bit of madness I just experienced. The psychological explanation of this. To derive something unknown from something familiar relieves comfort and satisfies, besides giving a feeling of power. Oh. To derive something unknown from something familiar relieves, comforts, and satisfies, besides giving a feeling of power. With the unknown, one is confronted with danger, discomfort, and care. The first instinct to abolish these painful states. First instinct is to abolish these painful states. Okay. I got distracted. There's a cat at my legs. First instinct is to abolish. Alright. Sit here for a second. Read seated upright. Aha! How's this look? But this looks somewhat strange and superb. Yes. Gaze up my nostrils, camera. Gaze. I want to stay. It's fighting me at every turn. How it looks. Really strange. But anyway. First instinct is to abolish these painful states. First principle, an explanation. The first principle, an explanation is better than none. Since at bottom, it is merely a matter of wishing to be rid of the oppressive representations. One is not too particular about the means of getting rid of them. The first representation that explains the unknown as familiar feels so good that one considers it true, the proof of pleasure, of strength, as criterion for truth. The causal instinct is thus considered upon and excited by the feeling of fear. Why? Why shall, if at all possible, not give cause for its own sake, so much so as for a particular kind of cause, a cause that is comforting, liberating, and relieving. That it is something already familiar, experienced, and in and inscribed in the memory, which is positioned as a cause. That is the first consequence of this need. Like, now this is what I expected from the existentialist. That which is new and strange and has not been experienced before is excluded as a cause. Thus one searches not only for some kind of explanation to serve as a cause, but for a particularly selected preferred kind of explanation, that which has most quickly and most frequently abolished the feeling of the strange and new, hitherto unexperienced, the most habitual explanations. Consequence: one kind of positing of causes predominates more and more. It's concentrated into a system, and finally emerges as dominant, that is, simply precluding other causes and explanations. The banker immediately thinks of business, the Christian of sin, and the girl of her love. The realm of morality and religion belongs under this concept of imaginary causes, the explanation of disagreeable general feelings. They are produced by beings that are hostile to us, evil spirits, the most famous case, the misunderstanding of the hysterical as witches. They are produced by acts which cannot be approved. The feeling of sin, of sinfulness, is slipped under as a psychological discomfort. One of the ways one always finds reason for being dissatisfied with oneself. They are produced as punishments, as payment for something we could not have done, for what we should have been, for what we should not have been, impudently generalized by Schopenhauer into a principle in which morality appears as what it really is, as the very poisoner and slanderer of life. Every great pain, whether physical or spiritual, declares what we deserve, for it could not come to us if we did not deserve it. World as will and representation 2, 666. So that is referencing Schopenhauer. World as will and representation, page 666. They are produced as effects of ill consideration, actions that turn out badly. Here the effects, the senses, are posited as causes, as guilty, and psychological calamities are interpreted with the help of other calamities as deserved. Interesting. The explanation of agreeable general feelings. They are produced by trust in God. They are pronounced by the consciousness of good deeds. This so-called good conscience, a psychological state which at times looks so much like a good digestion that it is hard to tell them apart. They are pronounced by the successful termination of some enterprises, a naive fallacy. The successful termination of some enterprises does not by any means give a hypochondriac or a Pascal agreeable general feelings. They are produced by faith, charity, and hope, the Christian virtues. In truth, all these supposed explanations are resultant states, and, as it were, translations of pleasurable or unpleasurable feelings into a false dialect. One is in a state of hope because the basic psychological feeling is once again strong and rich. One trusts in God because the feeling of fullness and strength gives a sense of rest. Morality and religion belong altogether to the psychology of error. In every single case, cause and effect are confused, or truth is confused with the effects believing something to be true, or a state of consciousness is confused with its causes. The error of free will. Today we no longer have pity for the concept of free will. We know only too well that we know only too well what it really is, the foulest of all theologians, artifices aimed at making mankind responsible in their sense, that is, dependent upon them. Here I simply supply the psychology of all making responsible. Wherever responsibilities are sought, it is usually the instinct of wanting to judge and to punish which is at work. Becoming has been deprived of its innocence when any being such and such is traced back to will, to purposes, to acts of responsibility. The doctrine of the will has been invented essentially for the purpose of punishment. That is because one wanted to impute guilt. The entire old psychology, the psychology of will, was conditioned by the fact that its originators, the priests at the head of ancient communities, wanted to create for themselves the right to punish, or wanted to create this right for God. Men were considered free, so they might be judged and punished, so they might become guilty. Consequently, every act had to be considered as willed, and the origin of every act had to be considered as lying within the consciousness, and thus most fundamental counterfeit in psychologists was made the principle of psychology itself. Today we have entered into the reverse movement, and we immoralists are trying with all our strength to take the concept of guilt and the concept of punishment out of the world again, to cleanse psychology, history, nature, and social institutions, and sanctions of them. There is, in our eyes, no more radical opposition than the theologians who continue with the concept of the moral world order to infect the innocence of becoming by means of punishment and guilt. Christian is a metaphysics of the hangman. I like that. See, it's not freeing you from responsibility. It's not saying that you are, free of all responsibility for what you have done. It's that the idea of punishment is just simply incorrect. That, that you have this. So here in the Christian context, what Nietzsche is talking about is, of course, original sin. And since he's talking about original sin and stating that by your guilt of being is the real problem here. You're guilty of being. You owe a debt. You must better yourself in the eyes of God, and ergo, to punish you, you must have free will. You get what I'm getting at there. It's a bit of a strange, convoluted statement. But to punish you for being, you must have free will. If you don't, you become unpunishable, not responsible for anything else. And so to try to cleanse that is to try to free. I will get into this more when I read Debt, the First 5,000 Years, which I'm absolutely going to read on the stream. But this concept that you owe this kind of irredeemable debt to a religion or faith or to anyone is ridiculous. You do not. In a lot of cases, the debt that you have is not, you did not choose to take it. It was given to you, or it was considered as a necessity. People look at student loan and say, oh yes, you have a responsibility to pay back that student loan. But did I take it, or did you take it? Because I did not take any student loans because of my privilege. Did you take it of your own free will? You were told your entire life that the only way to advance yourself was to go to college and become indebted. So now you have this debt, thus you can be punished, thus money can be made off of you. You have to work to pay off that debt using your degree that you have earned, which is kind of a strange concept in and of itself. You go to get this degree so that you may live a better life, but in fact you are then imprisoned by the method to which you got that degree, which is debt. But was that your own free will that you took that debt? And so this wish to abolish this idea of complete and total free will is fundamental the way I view the world at this point. Was it your choice? So even if you look at criminality, was it their choice that they committed a crime? Let's say if someone participated in gang activities, if that is the neighborhood that they grew up in, and the lifestyle that they've known best, and the lifestyle that they've seen reproduced around them, does it not make sense that that would be their most likely response? Which goes back to what he was talking about earlier, this idea that we have this urge to find a cause for whatever is going on around us, for whatever we're doing. We find that cause, and so I don't know what I'm talking about. I've gone insane. My thoughts are not in order. I apologize. What alone can be our doctrine? That no one gives man his qualities, neither God, nor society, nor his parents and ancestors, nor he himself. The nonsense of the last idea was taught as intelligible freedom by Kant, perhaps by Plato already. No one is responsible for man's being there at all, for his being such and such, or for his being in these circumstances, or in his environment. This fatality of his essence is not to be disentangled from the fatality of all that has been, that has been and will be. Man is not the effect of some special purpose, or a will, an end, nor is he the object of an attempt to attain an ideal humanity, or an ideal of happiness, or an ideal of morality. It is absurd to wish to devolve one's essence on some end or the other. We have invented the concept of end. In reality, there is no end. One is necessary. One is a piece of fatefulness. One belongs to a whole. One is in the whole. There is nothing which could judge, measure, compare, or sentence our being, for that would mean judging, measuring, comparing, and sentencing the whole. But there is nothing besides the whole, that nobody is responsible any longer. That mode of being may not be traced back to a causa prima, that the world does not form a unity, that the world does not form a unity either as a sensorium or as a spirit. That alone is the great liberation. That alone is the innocence of becoming restored. The concept of God was, until now, the greatest objection to existence. We deny God. We deny responsibility in God. Thereby do we redeem the world. The improvers of mankind. My demand upon the philosopher is known, that he take his stand beyond good and evil, and leave the illusion of moral judgment beneath himself. This demand follows from an insight which I was the first to formulate, that there altogether are no moral facts. Moral judgments agree with religious ones in believing in realities which are no realities. Morality is merely an interpretation of a certain phenomenon, more precisely a misinterpretation. Moral judgments, like religious ones, belong to a stage of ignorance. At which the very concept of the real and the distinction between the real is imaginary. And the distinction between what is real and imaginary are still lacking. Thus, truth at this stage designates all sorts of things which we call imaginary. Moral judgments, therefore, never to be moral judgments are therefore never to be taken literally. So understood, they always contain mere absurdity. Semiotically, however, they remain invaluable. They reveal, at least for those who know, the most valuable realities of cultures and inwardness which did not know enough to understand themselves. Morality is mere sign language, mere symptomology. One must know what it is all about to be able to profit from it. A first example, quite provisional. At all times they have wanted to improve men. This, above all, was called morality. Under the same word, however, the most divergent tendencies are concealed. Both the tampering of the beast, man, and the breeding of a particular kind of man have been called improvement. Such zoological terms are required to express the realities, to be sure, of which typical improver. The, the priest neither knows anything nor wants to know anything. To call the taming of the animal its improvement sounds almost like a joke in our ears. Whoever knows what goes on in menageries doubts that the beasts are improved there. They are weakened. They are made less harmful. And and through the depressive effect of fear, through pain, through wounds, and through hunger, they become sickly beasts. It is no different with the tamed man who the priest has improved. In the early Middle Ages, when the church was indeed above all a menagerie, the most beautiful specimens of the blond beasts were hunted down everywhere, and the noble Teutons, for example, were improved. But how did such an improved Teuton who had been seduced in a monastery look afterwards? Like a caricature of a man, like a miscarriage. He had become a sinner. He was stuck in a cage, imprisoned among all sorts of terrible concepts. There he lay, sick, miserable, malevolent against himself, full of hatred against the springs of life, full of suspicion against all that was still strong, and happy in short, a Christian. Psychologically speaking, in the struggle with the beast to make them sick, may be the only means for making them weak. The church understood. It ruined man and weakened him, but claimed to have improved him. Let us consider the other case of so-called morality, the case of breeding a particular race and kind. The most magnificent example of this is furnished by Indian morality, sanctioned as a religion in the form of the law of Manu. Here the task is set to breed no less than 4 races at once, one priestly, one warlike, one trade, and one agriculture, and finally a race of servants, the Sudras. Obviously, we are here no longer among animal tamers. A kind of man that is 100 times milder and more reasonable is the condition for every conceiving such a plan of breeding. One heaves a sigh of relief at leaving the Christian atmosphere of disease and dungeons for his healthier, higher, and wider world. Now wretched is the New Testament compared to Manu. How foul it smells! Yet this organization is found necessary to be this organization too found it necessary to be terrible. This time not in the struggle with the beasts, but with their counter-concept, the unbred man, the mishmash man, the Chandala. And again it had no other means. And again, it had no other means for keeping him from being dangerous, for making him weak, than to make him sick. It was the fight with the great number. Perhaps there is nothing that contradicts our feeling more than these protective measures of Indian morality. The third edict, for example, of Avadana Sastra 1 on impure vegetables, ordains that only nourishment permitted to the Chandala shall be garlic and onions, seeing that the Holy Scripture prohibits giving them grain or fruit with grain, or water or fire. The same edict orders that water they need not be taken from the rivers or wells, nor ponds, but only from approaches to swamps and from holes made by the footsteps of animals. They are also prohibited from washing their laundry and from washing themselves, since the water they are conceded as an act of grace may be used only to quench thirst. Finally, a prohibition that Sudra women may not assist Chandala women in childbirth, a prohibition that the latter may not assist each other in this condition. The success of this sanitary police of these police measures was inevitable. Murderous epidemics, ghastly venereal diseases, and thereupon again the law of the knife, ordaining circumcision for male children and the removal of internal labia for female children. Manu himself says, the Chandalas are the fruit of adultery, incest, and crime. These, the necessary consequences of the concept of breeding. For clothing they shall have only rags from corpses, for dishes broken pots, for adornment old iron, or for divine services only evil spirits. They wander without rest from place to place. They are prohibited from writing from left to right, and using the right hand in writing. The use of the right hand and of from left to right is reserved to the virtuous people of the race. It's quite the assault on Hinduism. These regulations are instructive enough. Here we encounter for once Aryan humanity, quite pure, quite primordial. We learn the concept of pure blood is the opposite of a harmless concept. On the other hand, it becomes clear in which people, the Chandala, the hatred against this humaneness, has eternalized itself, where it has become religion, where it has become genius. Seen in this perspective, the Gospels represent a document of prime importance, even more the Book of Enoch, Christianity sprung from Jewish roots, and comprehensible only as a growth on this soil, represents the counter movement to any moral or breeding or race, to any morality of breeding, of race, of privilege. It is the anti-Aryan religion par excellence. Christianity, the reevaluation of all Aryan values, the victory of Chandala values, the gospel, preached to the poor and base, the general revolt of all the downtrodden, the wretched failures, the less favored against race, the undying Chandala, hatred as the religion of love. The morality of breeding and the morality of taming are in the means they use, and entirely worthy of each other. We may proclaim it as supreme principle that to make morality one must have the unconditional will to its opposite. That is the uncanny problem which I have been pursuing the longest, the psychology of the improvers of mankind, a small and at bottom modest fact that of the so-called holy lie, Pia Fraus, offered to me the first approach to this problem. The holy lie, heirloom of the philosophers and priests who improved mankind. Neither Manu nor Plato nor Confucius nor the Jewish and Christian teachers have ever doubted their right to lie. They have not doubted that they had very different rights too. Expressed in formula, one might say, all the means by which one has so far attempted to make mankind moral were through and through immoral. What the Germans lack. Among the Germans today, it is not enough to have spirit. One must arrogate it. One must have the arrogance to have spirit. Perhaps I know the Germans. Perhaps I may even tell them some truths. The new Germany represents a large quantum of fitness, both inherited and acquired by training, so that for a time it may expand its accumulated store of strength, even squander it. It is not a high culture that has thus become the master, and even less a delicate taste, a noble beauty of the instincts, but more virile virtues than any other country in Europe can show. Much cheerfulness, and self-respect, much assurance in social relations, and in the reciprocity of duties, much industriousness, much perseverance, and an inherited moderation, which needs the spur rather than the brake. I add that here one still obeys without feeling that obedience humiliates. I add here one still obeys without feeling that obedience humiliates. Oh. And nobody despises his opponent. One will notice that I wish to be just to the Germans. I do not wish to break faith with myself here. I must therefore also state my objections to them. One pays heavily for coming to power. Power makes stupid. The Germans, once they were called the people of the thinkers, do they think at all today? The Germans are now bored with the spirit. The Germans now mistrust the spirit. Politics swallows up all serious concerns for really spiritual matters. Deutschland über alles. I fear that was the end of German philosophy. Are there any German philosophers? Are there German poets? Are there good German books? They ask me abroad. I blush. But with the courage which I maintain even in desperate situations, I reply, well, Bismarck, would it be permissible for me to confess what books are read today? A cursed instinct of mediocrity. Yes, well, anyway, I would say at the very least, I think the biggest downfall, if I were to compare the late 1800s Germany to modern day America, biggest downfall that has happened is, where are our authors? Where are our artists? Where is American philosophy? What has happened? Why? Why are we here in this situation? We are completely devoid of people who question anything that matters. And it's annoying. I find it very annoying. What the German spirit might be, who has not had his melancholic ideas about that? But this people has deliberately made itself stupid for nearly a millennium. Nowhere have the two great European narcotics, alcohol and Christianity, been abused more dissolutely. Recently, even a third has been added, one that alone would be sufficient to dispatch all fine and bold flexibility of the spirit. Music, are constipating German music. How much disgruntled heaviness, lameness, dampness, dressing gown on how much beer there is in the German intelligence. How is it possible that young men who dedicate their lives to the most spiritual goals do not feel the first instinct of spirituality, the spirit's instinct of self-preservation, and drink beer? The alcoholism of the young scholars is perhaps no question mark concerning their scholarliness. Without spirit, one can still be a great scholar, but in every other respect it remains a problem. Where would one not find the gentle degeneration which beer produces in the spirit? Once in a case that has almost become famous, I put my finger on such degeneration, the degeneration of our number one German free spirit, the clever David Strauss, into the author of a beer bench gospel and new faith. It was not for nothing that he made his vow to the fair brunette, beer, in verse, loyalty unto death. I was speaking of the German spirit. It is becoming cruder, it is becoming shallower. Is that enough? At the bottom, it is something quite different that alarms me. How German seriousness, German depth, German passion in spiritual matters are declining more and more. The verve has changed, not just the intellectuality. Here and there I come into contact with German universities. What an atmosphere prevails among their scholars, what a desolate spirituality, and how contented and lukewarm it has become. I would be a profound misunderstanding if one wanted to adduce German science against me. It would be also proof that one has not read a word I have written. For 17 years, I have never tired of calling attention to the despiritualization influence of our current science industry. the hard Helotism to which the tremendous range of the sciences condemns every scholar today is a main reason why those of the fuller, richer, profounder disposition no longer find a congenial education and congenial educators. There is nothing of which our culture suffers more than the superbalance of pretentious jobbers and fragments of humanity. Our universities are, against their will, the real hothouse for this kind of withering of the instincts of spirit, and the whole of Europe already has some idea of this. Power politics deceives nobody. Germany is considered more and more as Europe's flatland. I am still looking for a German with whom I might be able to be serious in my own way, and how much more for one with whom I might be cheerful. Twilight of the idols. Who today would comprehend from what seriousness a philosopher seeks recreation here? Our cheerfulness is what is most incomprehensible about us. Even a rapid estimate shows, let's see here, where am I at? Oh, close. Even a rapid estimate shows that it is not only obvious that German culture is declining, but that there is sufficient reason for that. In the end, no one can spend more than he has. That is true of the individual. It is true of the people. If one spends oneself for power politics, for economic, world trade, parliamentism, and military interest, if one spends in this direction, the quantum of understanding, seriousness, will, and self-overcoming which one represents, then it will be lacking for the other direction. Culture and state. One should not deceive oneself about this. One should not deceive oneself about this. Are antagonists. Kulturstate and Kulturstaat is merely a modern idea. One lives off the other. One thrives at the expense of the other. All great ages of culture, are ages of political decline. What is great culturally has always been unpolitical, even anti-political. Goethe's heart opened at the phenomenon of Napoleon. It closed at the war's liberation. At the same moment, when Germany comes up as a great power, France gains a new importance as a cultural power. Even today, much seriousness, much new passions of the spirit have migrated to Paris. The question of pessimism, for example, the question of Wagner, and almost all psychological and artistic questions are weighed incomparably more delicately and thoroughly than in Germany. The Germans are altogether incapable of this kind of seriousness. In the history of European culture, the rise of the Reich means one thing above all, a displacement of the center of gravity. It is already known everywhere, in what matters most, and that always remains culture. The Germans are no longer worthy of consideration. One asks, can you point to even a single spirit who counts from a European point of view as your Goethe, your Hegel, your Heinrich, your Heine, your Schopenhauer counted? That there is no longer a single German philosopher, about that there is no end of astonishment. The entire system of higher education in Germany has lost what matters most, the end as well as the means to an end. That education, that Bildung itself is an end, and not the Reich. And the educators are needed to that end, and not secondary school teachers and university scholars. That has been forgotten. Educators are needed who have themselves been educated, superior noble spirits, proved at every moment, proved by words and silence, representing culture which has grown ripe and sweet, not the learned louts whom secondary schools and universities today offer our youths as higher wet nurses. My God, that sounds amazingly familiar. Educators are lacking, not counting the most exceptional of exceptions, the very first condition of education, hence the decline of German culture. One of this rarest exceptions is my venerable friend Jacob Burckhardt in Basel. It, it is primarily to him that Basel owns its preeminence in humaneness. What the higher schools in Germany really achieve is brutal training, designed to prepare huge numbers of young men with as little loss of time as possible to become usable, abusable in the government service. Higher education and huge numbers, that is a contradiction to start with. All higher education belongs only to the exception. One must be privileged to have a right so high, to so high a privilege. All great, all beautiful things can never be common property. Pulcharum est paciorum hominium. That's Latin, which I don't understand. What conditions the decline of German culture? The higher education is no longer a privilege. The democratization of Bildung, which has become common, too common. Let it not be forgotten that military privileges really compel an all too great attendance in the higher schools, and thus their downfall. In present day Germany is no longer any In present day, no one is any longer free to give his children a noble education. Our higher schools are all set up for the most ambiguous mediocrity, with teachers, curricula, and teaching aims, and everywhere an indecent haste prevails, as if something would be lost if the young man of 23 were not yet finished, or if he did not know the answer to the main question, which calling? A higher kind of human being, if I may say so, does not like callings, precisely because he knows himself to be called. He has time. He takes time. He does not think of finishing. At 31 is, in the sense of high culture, a beginner, a child. Our overcrowded secondary schools, our overworked, stupefied secondary school teachers are a scandal. For one to defend such conditions as the professors at Heidelberg did recently, there may perhaps be causes. Reasons there are none. I put forward at once, lest I break with my style, which is affirmative and deals with contradiction and criticism only as means, one involuntary, the three tasks for which educators are required. One must learn to see, one must learn to think, one must learn to speak, and to speak and write. The goal in all three is noble culture. Learning to see, accustom the eye to calmness, to patience, to letting things come up, postponing judgment, learning to go around and grasp each individual case from all sides. That is the first preliminary schooling for spirituality. Not to react at once to a stimulus, but to gain control of all inhibiting, excluding instincts. Not to react at once to stimulus, but to gain control of all the inhibiting, excluding instincts. Learning to see, as I understand it, is almost what, unphilosophically speaking, is called strong will. The essential feature is precisely not to will, to be able to suspend decision. All unspirituality, all vulgar commonness depend on the inability to resist stimulus. One must react. One follows every impulse. In many cases, such a compulsion is already pathology, decline, a symptom of exhaustion. Almost everything that unphilosophical crudity designates with the word vice is merely psychological inability not to react. A practical application of having learned to see. As a learner, one will have become altogether slow, mistrustful, recalcitrant. One will let strange new things of every kind come up to oneself, inspecting them with hostile calm, and withdrawing one's hand, to have all doors standing open, to lie servilely on one's stomach before every little fact, always prepared for the leap of putting oneself into the place of, or of plunging into others and other things. In short, the famous modern objectivity is bad taste, is a noble par excellence. Interesting. Learning to think. In our schools, one no longer has any idea of this. Even in the universities, even among the real scholars of philosophy. I'm going to dog-ear this page. It's quite an interesting section. And I'm also going to put a star down here so that I may revisit if necessary. Learning to think. In our schools, one no longer has any idea of this. Even in the universities, even among the real scholars of philosophy, logic as theory, as a practice, as a craft, is beginning to die out. One need only read German books. There is no longer the remotest recollection that thinking requires a technique, a teaching curriculum, a will to mastery, that thinking wants to be learned like dancing, as a kind of dancing. Who among Germans still know from experience the delicate shudder which light feet in spiritual matters send into every muscle, the stiff clumsiness of the spiritual gesture, the bungling hand at grasping? That is German to such a degree that abroad one mistakes it for German character as such. The German has no fingers for nuances. That the Germans have been able to stand their philosophers at all, especially the most deformed especially that most deformed concept cripple of all time, the great Kant, provides not a bad notion of German grace. For one could not subtract dancing in every form from a noble education. To be better able to dance with one's feet, with concepts, with words, need I still add that one must be able to do it with the pen, that one must learn to write. But at this point, I should become completely enigmatic for German readers. Let's see here. Well, I'm at another pretty decent stopping point here. So I think I am absolutely going to call it, and I'll continue again later with gusto. I do like this concept of learning to see and think and write. I think Nietzsche is on to something here. Something that we, I would argue, have too forgotten in American education, where we don't teach people that learning is something that takes practice and expertise, like a dance, and it should be like a dance. Because dancing, while hard and difficult, is still fun and invigorating. Maybe I use fun incorrectly here, but and this idea of seeing, this idea of being accustoming the eye to calmness, see something and view it with this, what did he say, hateful something or other. Oh well, I'll find it at some point, I'm sure. Anyway, thank you for being here. If you've enjoyed listening to me read to you and yammer on about Nietzsche and the way that I feel that much of what he writes about lines up with our modern experience, go ahead and give it a follow. If you'd like to see more, check out the VODs on my YouTube channel. And if you're on those VODs, go ahead and give a like or comment or subscribe. But more importantly, Do whatever is necessary on whatever platform you're on, and please continue to overcome. This is the song that says that I'm closing down the show. Gonna throw up that hype. Woo!